Habari and karibu.
Asante sana. Very, very, very good morning to you all. I hope I am audible and that the 205 people here present will find it worth their while to spend this morning, part of the afternoon, together with us. We certainly are ready ourselves and are raring to go. I have very, 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 very special greetings to the Institute from a young lady that came down with me, Janet Kerubo. I don't know if anybody remembers Janet Kerubo. I saw her yesterday, and in conversation, I told her that we have this particular event taking place today, and she wished me to pass her most sincere regards to yourselves, and she also wished me to make the announcement that she is now a mother for the second time, in spite of being diagnosed with a bipolar mood disorder, which in a way is a good place for me to start, in a sense that when 1,000 of us plus, I think that time we were 1,200, met in Mombasa, Janet Kerubo's message resonated very loudly to those who are present in person and also online, because essentially what Janet was telling us was that, look, here I am. I have been diagnosed with bipolar mood disorder. I have had this condition since I was at university at the age of 19. And in spite of that, I have finished my first degree, and I continue to lead a reasonable life. But she did place a caveat. Those of you who are present that day will recall, by saying that she had been through the hands of organizations, and she gave us, I don't know if she gave us the names of those organizations, effectively saying that she had not felt understood by the HR practitioners that he had come across, and a number of them had treated her mental health condition as though it was a disciplinary matter. I am very, 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 very comforted by the fact that we, through the MOU that we have entered, more and more HR practitioners are becoming sympathetic to persons with mental health needs, and they are not being asked to go the punishment route. Now, I want to start this conversation by saying we are all winners. We are winners because, as I said to Irene and other people who came to me, this is a marathon that we are running. And when you are running a marathon, you cannot run it like a sprint by running very, 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 very fast. You run out of breath. What we are doing, and I think we as Kenyans are very special in this, we are taking a step at a time. We are acknowledging that we don't know everything, but we are saying because we don't know everything, we are prepared to teach and to learn from each other. When Irene, you mentioned the training manual that I think is to be launched, let me just say generally, after the elections, this is yet another tool that we are putting together that will help all of us work towards the most important resource that any organization can possibly have. Which brings me now to the topic. I don't know who chose this topic, but I think it's a brilliant, brilliant topic, which is a healthy mind is the greatest treasure that one can find. Indeed, when organizations look at their balance sheet and talk about the assets that they have in the marketplace, few of them understand the centrality of the human beings behind the organization. And not only are the human beings in the organization perhaps the most important asset, it is those human beings in the organization who are mentally healthy, who are key to running the organization. And as we will be demonstrating in the course of this webinar, we will be able to demonstrate to you, first of all, that a large number of people in your organization, in your respective organizations, have mental health needs of one form or another. And secondly, and much more crucial in my view, that it is possible to identify those people without requiring very many skills, or rather through skills that this Jerome of people are able to impart on themselves. Issues, for example, of absenteeism, presenteeism, all things that reduce the capacity of employees to perform to their optimum are all things that we'll be discussing with yourselves this morning. Now, the way it has been decided to go about this morning's presentation is as follows, and I hope that it will be a way that is acceptable to the organizers today. I was asked to do these opening remarks. Dr. Rajab will then say one or two things according to the slides that he has been allocated. And then we have Grace Gachanja, who is also with us and is a member of our team. I will be asking Grace in a moment to introduce herself. We also have in the team Victoria Rika, who might be able to introduce herself. And we will all. Charles is very active for some reason. Anyway, so that's how we'll do it. And I would really like to suggest, if it's okay with you, we are very, very, very happy to be interrupted at any point if we say anything. For example, if Dr. Rajab uses language that is not clear, you have our permission and encouragement to interrupt and ask Dr. Rajab, what did you mean by that? If I say something you don't like or you don't understand, or you want me to clarify, we are not afraid of being stopped and being asked to explain or to describe. So we are all of us here to learn. We are going to learn from you. I hope you will learn one or two things from us. And there we are. Given what I have said, Samoy and Irene, does either one of you have anything to say about the proposal on how we should run this webinar? If you like it, please say you like it.
Yes, yes. I think it's a good way to run the show. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. So the first formal presenter will be Dr. Rajab, who will take us through the first maybe 2 slides. Over to you, Dr. Rajab.
Thank you.
Happy to share the screen and take it away.
Thank you.
Dr. Rajab, are you there?
I'm trying to share. Just a minute.
Okay.
All right.
As Dr. Rajab is trying to share, I already know what slide he's going to show us. His first slide will be about mental illness in the general population. What he will be telling us, I hope, is that in the general population, there are a lot of people who have all manner of mental health needs. And I believe he will be sharing with us some numbers about how common it is, not just in the general population, but also, I hope, in hospital populations. Yeah, so over to you, Dr. Rajab, with your, yeah. All right.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Almost there. Yeah. Yeah. Dr. Rajab, do you want to start with the first slide or you want to start in the middle?
Thank you, Doc. Okay.
All right, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be the first one to run the slideshow. Welcome again for those who joined in later to this webinar, a mental awareness webinar for IHR in collaboration with the Chiromo Hospital Group as we celebrate the HR month. Our theme is a healthy mind is the greatest treasure to find, as we will break it down as time goes by. Our head presenter is Dr. Njenga, Presidential Advisor on Mental Health in Kenya. To start, a bit of statistics about mental illness in the general population so that we demystify the norm, or rather the notion that it's about the madman in the street. 20% of human beings have a mental illness in their lifetime. 11% of current mental illnesses. In Kenya, we have 11% of our population who have current mental health challenges. Of these, this translates to 970 million people who suffer mental illness globally. And a lot of our conditions start in the teenage group to middle age, which translates to about 30% of those of our populace who are around high school and university area. When COVID hit, 41% of the global population suffered a form of mental illness or the other. Japan seems to be doing the best with rates of 2.5%. So maybe at some point we need to actually benchmark what Japanese are doing so that they have a wellness program that is this effective. 2.5 is quite commendable. The most common illnesses that will present is actually not schizophrenia, which many people know, but depression, anxiety, and substance use. Most cases, alcohol, are the most common that present to the normal functioning human being.
Can I just clarify, Dr. Rajab, if we, yeah? Because the first bullet point is perhaps the most important point that Dr. Rajab has made, which is effectively that, now let me see how many people are here. We have, let's say we have 200 people in this webinar today. What Dr. Rajab is saying is that 20% of us will at one point or another in our lifetime have a mental health need, which in this case means that about, actually it's more than 40 because there are lots of people. So Dr. Rajab is saying 40 out of the 200 people here present. That's what you're saying, Dr. Rajab. And that's a large number of, it's a large number of us. And the second bullet point, I think, Dr. Rajab, what you're saying is that of the people currently who are not in hospital, who are not attending any outpatient department, just people who are in their matatus, on their farms, on their shops, wherever it is, currently, today, the 26th of July, 11% of all the people of Kenya will be having a mental health need of one sort or another. And that the fact that they don't know it does not mean that this condition is there. I hope that's what you're saying, Dr. Rajab.
Yes, Doc. So what then is mental health? The WHO guides us on this, and it says mental health is a state of well-being that enables each individual to realize their full potential, cope well with normal stresses of daily life, be able to productively and fruitfully work so that they can contribute to the community as intended. A healthy mind, by definition, then includes emotional, psychological, and social well-being. A healthy mind will affect how you think, how you feel, and how you act. So this works in unity with your mind and influences how you handle stress, relate to others, and make choices. What you let into your mind will affect your body, and what you let into your body will ultimately affect your mind. For example, if we use substances, whether it's alcohol, whether it's hard drugs like cocaine, heroin, they eventually will affect how your body will also perform and also how your mind performs. So we then have to find a balance between a healthy body and a healthy mind able for us to function optimally and be categorized as being healthy.
Now, Dr. Rajab, if you don't mind, again, just for emphasis,
yes,
and we might be able to get people to make comments, even at this point, if they so wish, and even go on the Q&A if that is possible. If you go back to the previous slide, Dr. And that's why you're in charge of this, is to make and repeat and re-emphasize that good mental health is not the absence of disease. It is a positive state. And that has to be emphasized and re-emphasized again and again, because many people think that as long as they have no obvious mental illness, then they are healthy. If you look at the second bullet point, for example, if you are a mother or a father or an employee for that matter, and you know, or others around you know, and I'm looking at the second bullet point now, that you have potential that you have not realized, you have the potential of being promoted, you have the potential of raising a family in a particular way, and you are unable to reach your full potential, then that could be a sign that you are mentally not well. If you look at bullet point number 3, again, by way of example, stresses are standard. Here in Nairobi, for example, we've been suffering extreme cold weather. In Europe, they're suffering extreme heat. Politicians in this country are exceedingly stressed because they're looking for jobs they might not get. But a mentally healthy person is one who is able to go through stresses of normal life, like family illness or bereavement and so on, without disintegrating. I want to emphasize this point because we will keep coming back repeatedly to what constitutes a mentally health person, because we are not here to eliminate the taxman from following us. We are not here to stop the bank demanding their money from us. We're not here to stop HR practitioners from writing letters to us. We are here to find a way of working productively and fruitfully. And the final point that I think is important is the second last bullet point: ability to contribute to your own community. The World Health Organization debated this point before including it as a measure of mental health, and eventually accepted the reality that if you are not making a contribution to your community, and by community, I don't mean your tribe, I mean the community in which you work and live, whether that is your church or your estate, whatever it is. If you're only making contributions to yourself and not to the community, then you cannot claim to be a mentally healthy person. And I repeat for emphasis, we used to add that good health is not the absence of disease or infirmity, it is positive attributes, as Dr. Rajab has stated. I don't know if you want to add anything else on this slide, Dr. Rajab.
No, look, I think it's well explained.
Yeah. Now, I know we have Gadoni. Yeah, actually, I see Gadoni, because I don't think Gadoni is allowed to speak. It's Grace who might want to make a comment on that.
No
Grace,
comment at the moment, Daktari.
Sorry?
Daktari, I don't have a comment.
You have no comment. Maybe.
Just said.
Sorry? Dr. Rajab, go on then.
Okay.
I do not have a comment to add to what you just said.
Sorry, who said they have a comment?
I think it was Grace saying that she doesn't have a comment on
It's a
this.
very good idea. You should never make comments if you don't have one. All right, continue, Dr. Rajab.
Okay. I think we'd covered this one. So what are the causes of mental illness? And this is very critical to know so that we can be clear that nobody is actually immune to mental illness. We are all at risk, and depending on how these factors interplay in our life and whether we do or we don't cope well, each one of us is at risk. We say the risk factors are multifactorial, the biggest one being genetics. If in the family there have been cases of mental health problems, there is a high likelihood that you can develop a mental illness. And other factors are environmental. What is the environment you grew up in? How was the situation at home? Were your parents available? Were they parents or were they hostile? When you went to school, how was the environment? When you went to campus, who were your friends? How was life? All these things that sometimes we forget as we grow up and we mature, you forget that they have slowly but surely been part of you. And if something went wrong there, it is very, very easy for them to trigger an event later in your life. The commonest illnesses, we will talk about this. Maybe actually I would encourage, we put them in the chat box. What do you know? Then we can revisit. What are the common mental illnesses that you know? I won't answer that right now.
Can I weigh in on this one, Dr. Rajab?
Yes.
Because again, the point you make is completely valid about genetics, for example. We are all the product of our genes in every respect. In other words, what we inherit from our mothers and fathers essentially is what we are. Meaning that we have inherited genes that will make us very clever or very tall or essentially sometimes suffer from diabetes or hypertension. Those are the genes that we inherit from our parents. And that is how we are made up. And therefore, what I would call the propensity for the development of different types of mental disorders is what we inherit from our parents. And that is what Dr. Rajab means when he says genetic factors. But I want to make a very, 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 very important point, not only relating to mental illness, but relating to health in general. And I will use the example of diabetes because, or hypertension, because we all know a lot about these two conditions. So what we inherit from our parents is the potential, for example, for developing diabetes. Whether we will develop overt diabetes or not is a matter of the environment in which we expose ourselves. For example, if you inherit the potential for developing diabetes and you become one who eats a lot of chapati, ugali, and mafuta, and you put on a lot of weight and you don't exercise, then the chance of developing diabetes is very high. On the other hand, if you inherit the same potential and you control your diet, you do lots of exercise and you're not overweight, you could escape from developing diabetes. So you're now asking yourself, how does that relate to mental health? In exactly the same way. If you live in an environment, whether it's a work environment or the family environment that is hostile to yourself, the likelihood that you will develop the illnesses that Rajab is about to tell us becomes very high indeed. So the fact of the genetics is important, because if you come from a family with a propensity for depression or schizophrenia, whatever it is, that is high. But, and again, we'll be coming to this in the course of this webinar, there are things you can do, just like you can do something about developing diabetes, that will make it less likely for you to develop depression. And just to give you a hint, one of those things would entail things like ensuring that your alcohol consumption is not excessive. So it is the interplay between your genes and the environment that are important and critical to whether you get overt mental illness or not. Dr. Rajab, do you want to further explain this point? Because again, people don't fully understand that what they inherit is a potential. And people don't fully understand the power we all have to contain developing the illnesses that you're about to tell us. Dr. Rajab?
Thank you, Doc. So since now I have to talk about the illnesses, I'll give an example. Depression, for example. Depression is one of the mental illnesses that is common and affects a lot of, especially adults, but quietly not talked about. How does risk factors like genetics and the environment, can they lead one to depression? Let's have an example of a young lady whose mother had bipolar mood disorder, for example. So from the mother, she has the risk of developing any other mental illness. Then as she grows up, she gets a fiancé. And just before they get married, the fiancé passes away from a road traffic accident. In the weeks to follow, this lady is noticed to be very sad, not interested in doing anything she used to like to do before. She is irritable. She doesn't eat as well. Sleep has become elusive to her. She starts feeling worthless. And at some point, she even questions her existence. Because of this event, the unfortunate event of her losing the fiancé, she then starts having suicidal thoughts. When that gets there, the next logical thing is to even attempt to die by suicide. So this patient with major depressive illness who had a mother with bipolar and went through a life event of the spouse passing on has ultimately developed a mental illness. The contributors for her developing this mental illness are both the environment and the genetics. I don't know if that example works. Other mental illnesses, we have schizophrenia. We'll talk about this later. We have bipolar mood disorder, and we also have alcohol use. And many times, alcohol use disorder or any substance of abuse for that matter is never the primary problem. It's usually a secondary problem as human beings try to avoid the primary problem.
Thank you, Dr. I think we can continue because you've raised the question of suicide has come up, so to speak, naturally in the case of the young lady whose future seems to have been damaged by the sudden death. Maybe you can tell us more about these facts that we have here. Thank you.
So suicide, which is coincidentally our next slide, is the fourth leading cause of death among the age groups of 15 to 29-year-olds, only after road accidents, tuberculosis, and human-to-human violence, like war and maybe armed robbery. About 700,000 people die by suicide each year worldwide. That means one death every 40 seconds. I don't know, we've been on this meeting for how long already? Let's say over an hour. Every 40 seconds, somebody dies by suicide. How many people have died so far? Let's do the math quietly. More than twice as many males die by suicide as females. I will explain this in a bit. There are more deaths from suicide, which is about 57%, than from war and homicide together. So you'll find that wars like what is happening in Europe right now, they take the front pages of newspapers, they dominate the highlights in the screens when news time comes. But when you actually look at the figures on what is leading to death, then the numbers show us that the things we should be concentrating on are a little different from what we actually do. 79% of suicides occur in low and middle income countries, where our country sadly falls. And the most common methods used usually is by taking pesticides, which is commonly known as organophosphate, or by hanging, or by the use of firearms. Why men are the ones who die by suicide more is it has been observed over time that men than females use more lethal ways, and their rates of success are higher. I don't know if you have anything to add, Doc.
No. I absolutely have two things to add, which, you see, there are things that we as, I don't know how to say this, as Africans are, by our culture, discouraged from talking about. And this taboo subject include the subject of suicide, because there is the false belief that if you talk to people about suicide, you're giving them ideas, and that these people will go and do what you have talked to them about. The science is the very opposite. Is the very opposite, meaning that if you are able to get people to talk about how they feel, even if it's a matter of feeling suicidal, the likelihood is that by talking, a solution could be found. So now, the big question that you ought to be asking yourself is, why would this Chiromo group want to tell HR practitioners about suicide and about suicide prevention and that sort of thing, because they are not doctors? Well, the truth is that in our experience, in the work environment, the most humane groups of workers actually are those who work in the HR department. And you, in our experience, are at the center of the human beings who work in any organization. And it is to you, HR practitioners, that staff or employees ought to come in moments of distress. And that is distress, whether it is distress with their own families, whether it is distress that arises from difficulties in the workplace, whether it is distress that is just simply illness that they cannot cope. If people need to ask for time off to go to hospital, or just to have time off because they're not coping, it is to you, HR practitioners, that ordinarily they should come to. And it is therefore crucially important. And that's why we are so happy and privileged to be able to be talking to you this morning. Additionally, and I think this is a very important day we are talking, on the 2nd of August, which is next week, the Republic of Kenya is taking yet another gigantic step as a people in launching the suicide prevention strategy. What the government has done through the Ministry of Health and other state agencies is to develop a strategy that will be disseminated to people such as yourselves, that will give you the kind of numbers that Dr. Rajab is giving you, but more importantly, will arm you with the skills to participate in the prevention of suicide. And you'll be surprised at how simple some of those strategies can be. This morning, I came across an item from the American Psychiatric Association, which is ridiculous in its simplicity. I wish I could show it to you. From this month of July, the American Suicide Prevention Line has changed its number from a long, long number, and now the American Suicide Prevention number is number 988. A very, very, very simple number, 988, not 999, 988. And what they have realized that simply by making short and memorable the phone number to report yourself as being suicidal, they have increased the number of calls to the suicide line by 45% in the last 3 weeks. It tells you that we must keep thinking all the time about the strategies. So what we'll do, if HRM are interested, after the launch of this suicide prevention strategy by the government, if there is need, if there is interest, maybe Dr. Rajab and other people who will be able to do so can take us through this, because it is legitimate. And it's not just a discussion about suicide and attempted suicide. It is a conversation around all those things that make suicide and suicidal attempts more likely, including depression, alcohol use disorders, unresolved stresses, that sort of thing. So it's an interesting subject. It is live. And if we can talk about preventing death from corona, we should be able to talk about preventing death from suicide by just being sensible and putting in place preventive strategies. Thank you.
So some answers here as to why males affected more. Male depression and suicide is commonly associated with the socialized masculinity, making it difficult to confide in others. Like Dr. Njenga has mentioned, the taboo for anyone, and especially a man, to talk about being suicidal makes them die silently. Men are trained to hide their feelings. I don't know if trained is the right word, or expected by the society. As a man, you shouldn't be emotional. There's also an observation from a few studies that middle-aged men have more acquaintances than friends. So all the men in the house this morning, we are now at 293. If you're a middle-aged man, ask yourself, do you have friends or acquaintances? What is your social support like? Who are the people you can run to when you are in distress? Or everyone will scatter once problems knock at your door. There's also a very common occurrence to the people whom we see to be successful in the society, and they are flashy in the media, in the social media, but deep down they're struggling with issues, but society does not expect them to actually be having problems. So then the logical thing is they keep quiet about what they are going through until at some point they feel maybe death is better than this life that everyone else seems to admire so much. That brings the statistics that 70% of all suicides are by men. Quite a big number.
Now, you've scared people. I can see them. I can see men in particular.
Yes.
Trembling, actually. I think I can see people trembling because what they are wondering, and I think they're quite right in so wondering, for example, why is it that 70% of those people who die by suicide are men? They are saying they would have thought that women are more likely to die by suicide because, no, it's not true. Women attempt suicide more often than men, but the act of completing suicide is much more common in the case of men, exactly as you have said, because the men use more lethal tools to end their lives. The second bullet point from the bottom, I think, is worth considering further, because again, it is true and it's absolutely scary. You're telling us that fame and fortune sometimes hide deep troubles. Now, many people in the world, not just in Kenya, try to, how shall I put it, to work their way out of problems by working very hard and making a lot of money, and people believe that the richer you are, perhaps the more happy you might become. Science is very, very, very clear on this one point, that actually money, as the old song says, money don't buy you happiness, and that happiness and the movement away from depression comes from areas that are deeper than more and more money. A very interesting, rather old book now called Britain on the Couch addresses this point extremely well by demonstrating that from 1950, moving on towards the current days, the British have become wealthier in every conceivable way. They have bigger houses, they have bigger cars, they have better social facilities, they have, in absolute terms, their salaries have gone up and so on. But the same studies have shown that the rates of suicide have gone up at the same time, the rates of alcoholism have gone up, the rate at which people fight domestically, all the negatives that indicate dysfunction at the family level are higher in spite of increased fortune in the society. So the conversation that we cannot have today, but could have another day, is why is it? And there are other examples. I mean, if you look at, for example, the House of Windsor, Her Majesty's home, they are some of the richest people in the world. They are the ones that we are told were born with silver spoons in their mouths. And the rates of unhappiness, whether you're looking at Princess Diana or even this young chap who's married a girl from I don't know where, there's no link between more money and happiness. And I think it is important to debunk that, because you as HR practitioners will be confronted by people who will come and say, oh, I am feeling sad, oh, I'm feeling depressed. The reason for that, and in fact, we heard this last week, Dr. Rajab, if you can tell the people that all we need is a little more money and happiness will come to the whole company. Incurable nonsense. That is not true. So it's good to have these conversations, and you have made the point very well. Poor men, all of us, poor men, we are expected to hide our feelings. We do that extremely carefully. And one of the ways we do that is we go drinking pombe on bar counters, either in our clubs or in bar and restaurants, wherever it is. It appears like we are laughing loudly with the barman. In fact, on the inside, we are crying. So an HR practitioner who notices that a colleague is coming to work on Mondays or Fridays, whatever it is, with red eyes or smelling of booze, that is a sign that he's probably a man who is unable to express their feelings. I hope that makes sense, Dr. Rajab.
Thank you. Symptoms of mental illnesses. So the DSM-5, which is our manual for diagnosing mental illnesses, so far has 300 mental disorders on record. At 299 participants, we can each have one disorder, and we still will have one left. That is how many mental illnesses are. Some of the symptoms that you can look at, we actually now at 300, so we would have exhausted the DSM. sadness, lack of interest, hopelessness. So you can see these behaviors and these emotional changes in someone. And most of the times it is said, a lot of people around you will notice you are not okay before you can notice it yourself. So these are some of the things to actually look at. The next one is insomnia. Your partner will notice you're not sleeping as well. Lack of energy. It's in 8 a.m., actually 6:30. You're supposed to get up, prepare for work, but you feel like you need 2 more hours of sleep. Your day is no longer as productive. By 10 in the office, you already feel like you've worked a 12-hour shift. Social withdrawal. You are a happy person. Maybe on weekends you used to meet with your colleagues or friends, go play some golf, go catch a movie. All of a sudden you give excuses because you just want to be by yourself. Difficulties in relationships. The primary one at home gets strained first. If you have a spouse, then you find that friends get affected, family gets affected. Then ultimately you are isolated. Nothing works against someone's well-being than being isolated. Not by choice, but just by how your behavioral changes are leading you into a rabbit hole. Another thing to look out for is unintentional weight changes. People think people who are depressed, for example, only don't eat, but the opposite also happens. There are those people due to stress or distress actually eat a lot as a way of coping, so they can have unintentional weight gain, as well as those who don't eat and can have unintentional weight losses. Excessive use of alcohol, like Dr. Njenga has alluded, you go to the bar at the counter, you have your first bottle, you start talking to the bar attendant. Ultimately, your therapist who isn't really paying attention to you and with absolutely no intention of coming up with solutions for you. Excessive use of alcohol is the commonest way of how people, we like saying, is self-medication, because you're taking this alcohol to try and feel better. But ultimately what you're doing is you're actually introducing a second problem, and that is of dependence on top of the first problem you have, whatever distress you're already going through in life. Doc?
Thank you very much. I think the only thing I would like to emphasize is that there are now 300 of us in this webinar. The first point you made is very important, that contrary to what many lay people believe, mental disorders are many. And as you have said yourself, each of us can have one and still have some to spare. Because what people say is, wachana na huyo, ana ugonjwa wa kiakili. In every conceivable respect, whether it's in terms of what causes mental illnesses, whether it is in terms of how they are treated, whether it is in terms of the outcome of these conditions after treatment, whether it is in the way they impact or do not impact the work environment, each of the nearly 300 mental disorders has a different way that it affects the workplace. Some obviously, and again we'll be coming to this, can be quite disruptive at the workplace. Others, like depression, might not disrupt the work environment, but would make the person who is supposed to be working appear to be lazy. And this is the kind of individual that the HR department will write letters to. Carelessness, not returning calls, not attending meetings, appearing disheveled, rudeness at the workplace. All these things are the ones that attract cautionary letters from HR department. And I think when we have finished with the training manual that I believe is being developed with the Institute and the Chiromo Group, these are the kind of issues that will be highlighted to indicate before disciplinary action is taken on a man or woman who has for 10 years worked diligently, consideration ought to be given to the possibility that this individual, on account of a depressive illness, has insomnia, lacks sleep at night, and therefore is unable to perform their duties. Our intention here is to cause you as HR practitioners to always consider the possibilities. If you look, for example, at the bullet point, the third one from the bottom, difficulties in relationships. Some people with depression, for example, will manifest this depression as rudeness, either to their bosses or to their colleagues or even to their customers. And if it's a person who has always been a good receptionist or a good customer service person who suddenly is reported 3 or 4 times in a month as showing difficulties, a good HR practitioner, after the training that you will receive, should be able to ask themselves, is it possible that we are dealing with the early stages of depression or anxiety, whatever it is? So what are we saying? Dr. Rajab and the team are saying that for the HR practitioner, this is not a theoretical presentation. This is a conversation about real things that happen in real places in real time. Now, I was just looking at the chat, and I think Dr. Rajab, it's right that we should be sensitive to our audience. And one of the questions I see here is we have people who walk around talking to themselves aloud and making gestures. What is this referred to? Is the question to you, Dr. Rajab. People who go around talking to themselves. What is that? Go on.
Well, I think there are several situations why someone would do that. The first one is an illness called schizophrenia. This person who you see talking to themselves is actually responding to what we call... Sorry? Okay. I'm saying this person you see talking to themselves sometimes is actually having a psychotic episode. And what is happening is that they're having a hallucination, an auditory hallucination for this mic, where they are hearing voices and they are obliged to actually respond to them. Another scenario how this could happen is just because of the normal stresses. Let's say a businessman just walked out of a meeting that initially was supposed to go well, but from that meeting, all the prospects they had and from the investments they had, it is bleak going forward. So you find from these outbursts of emotions, someone is seen to just respond by expressing their inner thoughts loudly. Not because of a psychotic episode, but just because of the distress currently and the adrenaline rush that they have without, or rather involuntarily, they actually loudly express their thoughts. Those are 2 examples that I could give for that situation.
Dr. Rajab, there's another question from some anonymous person asking you to address the question of pressure from family and the way that could lead on to mental disorder. That is from Mr. or Mrs. or Miss Anonymous.
Okay. That one squarely lies in what we alluded to as environmental factors. Family members or even friends, the expectations, or even actually workplaces the expectations they have on you as an individual sometimes may be overwhelming to a point that causes some level of anxiety. And when you feel that you are not living up to their expectation, you are always falling short. You find that your self-esteem goes low. And when the self-esteem goes low, your productivity, even on what you used to do well, also starts to dwindle. And this anxiety can slowly translate into depression as you now are on a cycle of unproductivity. And that is how a mental illness can actually develop from the environment that is not supportive, either home, friends, or even at the workplace. Thank you.
Dr. Rajab?
Yes.
And there's also the panic attacks that one can experience. You just have palpitations and you're just shaking and you can't remember anything triggering it. So how do you explain that? Thank you.
Most of the time, sorry?
Go on, Doc. Go on, Dr.
Okay, I'm saying a panic attack is actually a recognized mental disorder. It's part of the spectrum of anxiety disorders. When you don't have a trigger for it, it's actually categorized as general anxiety. But it's general because it is from a culmination of what, from your perspective, would be small triggers that don't add up, but cumulatively, they actually make you uneasy. What you're experiencing when you have that palpitation, when you have the difficulty in breathing, your mind is clouded, confusion, sometimes even trembling and sweating profusely, is your body's reaction, just that it is now doing an overreaction to what other human beings would be a normal reaction. For example, the same situation, this gentleman, this meeting hasn't gone well. And the moment he steps out of that room, the boardroom, let's say, steps out and he breaks down. There are people who would go to the same meeting and it doesn't go well. And they're like, well, it is what it is. We fight another day. But for this particular individual, because of the accumulation of this stress, maybe this deal, he's been struggling with it for some time and there's a lot at stake. There are family members, maybe he has employees he needs to pay, and yet the deal has tanked. All of a sudden, it causes this overreaction to an emotional trigger, so that the chemicals that normally we have to produce in a stress situation are overproduced, and that is how someone develops a panic attack.
Can I just add on to that, Dr. Raja, by saying that, and I can see where a little bit of confusion could arise.
Yeah.
And this is, again, a very, very important point, because in the practice of mental health, there are words and terms that exist in English and are used as part of the daily English lingua. And the same word is used technically by mental health specialists, such as Dr. Rajab. And panic attack is one similar one. When Dr. Rajab talks about panic disorder, he is talking about a clinical entity that has very definite symptoms and etiology and treatment. When an HR practitioner is talking about panic, they are probably referring to a potential employee who has attended an interview and panics. When a potential employee panics during an interview, that is not a medical condition. That is a person who is scared because, they are being interviewed by a very senior person. So panic at an interview is completely different from the panic disorder that mental health practitioners see, say in the casualty department at 2 a.m. with somebody believing that on account of rapid breathing, their heart is going to stop, they are sweating, they are trembling, and some of them even end up in intensive care. So let's be careful, very careful about the way we use words, because the same word has technical meaning and also has lay meaning. Dr. Rajab, there's another question for you here from Juliana Ouma. And you don't have to answer it in detail because we have to move on. What are the simple mechanisms or strategies that we as HR professionals can employ at work to have good mental health, presumably in the workplace?
Okay, thank you. The first simple mechanism to do is like what we are doing right now, sensitize each other.
Doctor,
yes.
Just before you answer to that one, I think she has two questions.
Okay.
And the other one is actually, is there a tool that we can use that can be used by HR professional to realize or measure mental health problems among staff at work? I think that you can combine together so that we move.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the first question on what can we do at the workplace to notice and help our colleagues at work. Examples start with what we are doing right now is to sensitize each other, be aware that they exist, these problems, so that when they are placed on our desk, the first thing is not to write a dismissal or a show cause letter, but to actually maybe interrogate further. The second thing to do is to be available and approachable by your staff so that they can come and express their concerns without fear of being, stigmatized or even, what's the word I'm looking for? Victimized. Another thing that we can do is also to encourage our staff to actually be open. And then in the culture of each institution that we work in, what have we included that promotes well-being? Do we have breaks enough for the staff, or are they working straight shifts? Are their leaves approved, or are they denied every other time? Do we ensure that maybe the finance department settles their dues in good time? What are the motivational packs we have for them? As human beings, we drive more from affirmation. Do we ever encourage them? Do we ever tell them they have done good? Or it's always you've fallen short every time, year in, year out? Those are the simple things that can be done.
Okay, maybe I can answer the next one,
yes.
Rajab.
Sure.
Because the other question that Juliana is asking is a very, very, very important one. And if, Victoria, you are around and are able to weigh in, the question Juliana is asking, as we've been told, is she's looking for a tool that HR professionals can use to measure mental health problems among staff at the workplace. Victoria, maybe you can answer that question, because at the end of the day, this is what we are here to do. We are here to arm HR practitioners with an easily available tool that they can go back and use that will enable them find out what. Victoria, are you able to answer that?
Yes, Dr. Jeng, I can answer that.
Go ahead, please.
So thank you. Well, my name is Victoria. I'm a clinical psychologist. So in response to that question, whether we do have assessments, yes, we do have them. We have an assessment, for example, for depression. We also have one for anxiety. We have for burnout. We also have one which can assess alcohol use disorder. So under our wellness program, we are able to either do these in-house, coming to the facility to do the assessments, or we can avail the assessments online to the parties that would be concerned and needing to have the assessment done. So yes, we do have the psychometric assessments and they are readily available from our facility. Thank you.
You have not finished. You have not finished, because Juliana is asking if it will be possible for your institution to make them available through IHRM. Is it possible or is it not possible?
It is possible because we do have a partnership with them. So yes, it is possible.
Okay, so maybe you can organize that. All right, very good.
Yes. Thank you.
All right. Now that we have you, Victoria, there is a question here from Margaret Kanga. What could be the issue with an employee who has prolonged absenteeism issue, even after many warnings from the HR department? Victoria, now that we have you.
Thank you, Dr. Jenga. Well, I really wish that we would have a little bit more information on that particular employee, because it could be very many issues which could be preventing
Give us a few
him from
examples,
performing.
please.
Examples could be something like stress emanating from the home front, which could be leading to depression. When we have depression, like Dr. Rajab did mention, you normally have no motivation. So things that previously he enjoyed performing, he no longer has that desire. So it could be something like depression. It could also be other things like maybe change management within the workplace. So usually when an employee is absent for many instances, despite warnings, there's more to it than just that absence. And you need to have something to, there needs to be some sort of inquiry to find out, is there something happening to this employee at the work, at the home front, at the work front, which is where things like now employee assistance programs come in, because someone is pointed towards looking at the employee in terms of how they're performing, you know, in terms of what could be affecting them away from the work front. So those could be underlying issues. It could be depression, it could be drug use, it could be anything, but with little information to go by, would only be hazarding what could really be the problem or the issue.
The next question to you, Victoria, is why do men live in a state of denial when it comes to mental health?
I would say, Dr. Jenga, probably it's because of how we've socialized men. They're socialized not to show their feelings. If a man is going through depression, for example, he's been socialized to tough it out, to ride it out. You know, men don't cry, men don't show emotions. So if they're suffering in any way from any mental health disorder, then they will not want to show it because it is a sign of weakness on their part because of how they are socialized, which is why we are trying to tell the male fraternity that it is okay for them to say they are not okay. It is okay for them to seek help. And for those of us who are bringing up little boys who will eventually become the men of the years to come, to allow them to be able to share their emotions and to let them know that it is okay for them to be vulnerable. But what do we do when we have those young boys within us and we tell them, you know, don't cry, don't show your emotions, don't be girlish? What happens to them? We stifle the emotions, and we know that just like women experience emotions or young girls experience emotions, that even the boys do have emotions, because at the end of the day, they are human beings. So why do they stifle their mental feelings? It's because of how we have socialized them, which is what we're trying to break them out of that shell of how the society has perceived men should be.
Victor, if you don't mind, maybe the people on this webinar might be interested to hear what you and your teams do in November of every year, which is the International Men's Day, and how you can partner with the Institute perhaps on how we look after these weak men. Oh, sorry, not weak men, these men.
Dr. Jenga, I need your assistance on that. Come again, November?
No, maybe it's Gadoni. Is Gadoni on this call? Because we do have celebrations on. Is Gadoni around? Yeah, Gadoni?
That should be Gadoni's call.
Yeah.
Yes, I am, Dr. Reed.
Can you tell us the people what we do on the 19th of November every year?
The 19th of November is the day that we used to celebrate what we call the IMD, International Men's Day. So as part of our CSR activities, we bring men together and create safe spaces to hold a conversation in relation to mental health. We also have what we call the Mental Health Man Cave, that we also create safe spaces for men within the hospital. to have a conversation. And this is just a space where you come, no cameras, no phones, no taking photos. It's for men by men themselves.
What you haven't told the people here present is that it is the event we run that has the highest demand of all the things that we do. Tell them.
Sorry, the event?
The man cave, when you put it up, when you open it up, it's usually filled up in what? Go on. The man cave.
So how we are able to get people to join in the man cave, we usually use a link that we put online via the Eventbrite. We want it to be able to be completely anonymous, and anybody can be able to choose to join or not. So the man cave is actually, true to what Dr. is saying, the only event that every time we put up a link and announce that this month we are going to have the man cave, within 1 hour or less than 1 hour, all the slots are completely booked almost immediately. So yeah, it's in quite high demand, these safe spaces for men.
Which in a sense is a good thing, because it tells us that much as men, we have many issues. When we are given a safe space, we're able to grab it, and very, very interesting conversations take place in these very enclosed spaces. I'm going to ask Dr. Rajab to answer one more question, and then he must continue with his presentation. Dr. Rajab, you're being asked, can someone really fully recover from depression or be free from triggers, from past abuse, or they just find a way to manage and live with it? Dr. Rajab?
Thank you, Doc. Well, depression can be managed with the help of both medication and what we call psychotherapy, where you actually have sessions with the clinical psychologist. We can manage it to a point where you can even be off medication and continue with psychological empowerment. And this also happens to the traumas of the past, that in the initial phases, if you're in too much distress, you will need some help with medication. But subsequently, upon good follow-up, you can actually be off medication and just continue with therapy. And in the long run, once the therapist and you feel you've been equipped enough to actually handle the challenges that came from your past, or even present going forward with the teachings that you had through therapy, then we can say you have now been controlled of depression. But there is always a risk of a relapse if not well followed up. So the key is good follow-up to prevent relapses, or to pick them very early to prevent a full-blown episode again.
That is such an important question. I have to restate the answer, which is correct. That the key to good outcomes in mental health is early diagnosis and early treatment and consistent and persistent follow-up, full stop. The outcome is dependent on the extent to which the individual is followed up. And there are thousands upon thousands of human beings that we have treated in the last 40 years plus, who have gone on to finish university, who have gone on to continue in good marriages, who have gone on to have children, who have gone on into old age, in spite. I mean, this Janet girl that we saw in Mombasa with the Institute is getting on with her life in spite of very severe disease. So it is possible. Now, there's a question here that I really must have answered by Victoria. It is such an important question. It's from an anonymous attendee, and it is asking, I'm a mother. I recently got back to work, presumably after having a baby, and I still don't feel connected to my work. I have become more sensitive. I don't feel like I'm progressing. Everyone else around me looks motivated and presumably happy, but my end is dead. I don't interact as much nowadays. I don't know when lastly I went out with my friends. Victoria, are you able to answer that question on what seems like, well, you tell us what it is.
Thank you, Dr. Jenga. This possibly could be postpartum depression, which affects many mothers, and as well as fathers also suffer from postpartum depression. She says she does not feel connected to her work. She's become more sensitive and she does not feel like she's progressing, whereas everyone around her looks motivated. So this is a very classic symptom of postpartum depression, which happens a lot to mothers. And like we've said, fathers also do suffer from postpartum depression. However, we always say that it's important to have an assessment done so that we work with a diagnosis which has been clinically diagnosed. Thank you, Dr. Jenga.
Yeah, I mean, let me emphasize and re-emphasize that 15% of new moms in the world, not just in Kenya, will get a clinically significant postnatal depression, meaning that a normal event such as bringing life to another human being does lead to a treatable medical condition. And the reason this is an important question from this lady is because now that she's back at work, the HR department might think, wachana na huyu wana shida na bwana yake, or they might think anasumbuliwa na mtoto, or they might think whatever they might think. It is very, 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 very important when one thinks about women's mental health in particular, that one considers this postnatal depression issue. There's a bit of electioneering going on around me. If you hear some noise, forgive me. But this is very, very important because it's very common, but it's even more important because it is treatable. We have so many questions. Dr. Rajab, are you able to rush through your presentation and we'll come back to the questions?
Sure, Doc.
Thank you. Actually, Dr. Rajab, maybe I can save you. Shall we ask Grace Kachanja to help you with the next series of slides?
Sure.
Just so that you can take a breather. Is Grace with us?
Yes,
Grace
I am.
Kachanja, are you able
Yes,
to
I'm
take
with
us
you.
through this slide? Yeah, go ahead. And then Dr.
Thank
Rajab
you.
can take a bit of a break.
All right. Okay, so this is Grace Kashanja, psychologist at Chiramo Hospital Group. So we'll go straight into the slides, picking up from where Dr. Rajab left off. And now looking at how do we actually diagnose a mental illness? What are some of the symptoms that we are on the lookout for? And we really do highlight these 4 Ds of abnormality, and we borrow them from the behavior of the person as we know them. So this could be a colleague, this could be your partner at home, this could be a friend, this could be your child. And we look at these changes in behavior, having noted that when we're looking at a healthy mind, we're looking at how this person thinks, how they feel, and how they act. And you'll notice that we'll borrow a lot of those when understanding these. So when we're speaking about deviance, we're looking at now a person's behavior being different from how this person normally behaves. Talking of now an employee who normally comes into work early, attends to his duties on time, comes in for meetings, is, well-groomed. But then you notice of late, over a couple of days, over a couple of months, they're coming in later than usual. They've withdrawn from the team. They're coming, probably handing in their assignments late, probably even coming into work drunk. Those are indicators of behaviors that are different from what was normal. Also looking at dysfunction can also come in, where this dysfunction, we now look at it in the space of the work, at home, and maybe even at school if this is a person who's still in school. So dysfunction may look like them not attending to their normal duties as was before. Dysfunction could be that they don't pay their rent on time. Dysfunction could be that they are no longer able to achieve their daily duties, maybe even paying rent, being a parent, being a present partner in their household. And we also look out for distress, and distress could now be referred to as distress either to themselves or to the people around them. And when we talk of distress, maybe to themselves could be like when you're feeling distressed, maybe you didn't have enough sleep because you're not eating enough, because you're feeling like you're hearing voices of other people talking to you and about you. That could be an indicator of distress. Other people could also be experiencing distress from the behavior that this person is having. Say, for example, if they are a team member and they're not handing in their work on time, and that affects the performance of the whole team in general, or even that of the organization as a whole. And then we also see danger as being another indicator of mental illness. And when we talk of danger, we are now looking at a danger to either themselves or the people around them. So this is where the aspect of self-harm, maybe cutting, wounding themselves, or even attempting suicide, or thinking of attempting suicide, or even hurting someone else, or being violent or aggressive towards someone else comes in. And even as we look at these 4 Ds, we also bring in the role of the cultural implication of it as well. So when you look at culture, we also always look at the culture, not just of the place where this person is coming in, say in this situation, the Mombasa region, but also the culture of the organization. Like, say, for example, as an organization where you work, if I was to use the example of Chiromo, we have a dress code that we fit by. You need to be formally dressed. So if someone comes in and they're wearing maybe very bright colored clothes, something that you will see if they were out night partying and they've reported to work, that's an indicator of cultural inappropriateness. So we always look at now these behaviors or these changes that this person is having in the context of these 5 aspects, and us then noticing that those could be indicators of mental illness. So when these do happen, then there are indicators that we definitely should send this person to maybe see a psychiatrist like Dr. Jengo, Dr. Rajab, or a psychologist like myself, or Victoria, or Gadoni. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So when we talk of stress, thank you. We look at stress as basically what everyone says. And stress is how we either emotionally or psychologically react, or even physically at times, to any demand that has been placed upon us. And I like thinking of it in the very funny way of maybe being chased by a dog and how you get very scared and you run off. That's an example of a physical reaction to stress. Emotional could be maybe the mind fog that comes in when you find that you're running in late and maybe your laptop has crashed and you have a presentation to make in a few minutes. So stress does come in, and it does come in very different aspects, and it affects everyone differently. So whenever we experience stress or even talk about stress, we look at it with regard to 3 different categories of the types of stress. So either we have acute stress, episodic stress, or chronic stress. Just to replace this in how we experience it on a day-to-day basis, what acute stress may look like is that it's a short burst of stress, sort of like the kind of stress that comes in when you have a presentation to make and you probably have an hour or 2 or maybe even a day before the presentation is due. So that is very short term, and it goes on over a long time, over a short time, and then it passes. And then we have episodic stress coming in thereafter. And when you talk of episodic stress, in this case, it comes on, it's episodic. It's like you can almost predict that at this time you often find yourself getting stressed. Like, say, for example, if you do monthly reports or quarterly reports, every end of the month, you can tell that maybe around that time you get stressed. For some people, it's because of the financial situation of the country. It's often related to paying bills, paying rent, making sure that everyone is sorted, and then figuring out how to make it to the end of the month again. And then in that case, we also have chronic stress now coming in. And chronic stress is now where you constantly under stress for a prolonged period of time. This one we often see, say, for example, in people who are working jobs that they don't enjoy, or maybe they are taking care of someone with a chronic illness, or even they themselves have a chronic illness, and that is now affecting them. And generally, we do find that there's an actual relationship between stress and mental illness, often related to when someone is exposed to high levels of stress over prolonged periods of time. then the risk of getting a mental illness, developing or even being diagnosed with a mental illness then comes in. And the most common mental illnesses we do find within this space are depression, anxiety disorders, and substance use disorders. But also to indicate, if you do not get diagnosed with any of these mental illness, sometimes even our body physically becomes unwell, and going to the hospital, you may not necessarily be diagnosed with an illness as such, because you're getting very vague symptoms, so to speak, probably running stomach, discomfort, headaches, backaches, joint pains, probably that coming in, and that is actually related to some of the stress hormones that get produced by your body during this time that you're exposed to these very high levels of stress now coming in. Next slide, please.
No, not so fast.
Sorry.
Not so far. Go back. No,
sorry.
Because, you've made some very, very, very good points. And I want them to sink. Because, just go back, please. What you have said, Grace, is that if you go, for example, the next slide, please. In a work environment, this is the correct slide. What really causes people to go into mental illness is not the acute stress of their laptops crashing before they do a presentation. It's not the acute stress that comes to you because the boss has come in a foul mood because he had a fight with his wife. That doesn't cause you to go into. It's where you have chronic stress at the workplace, where either your job is very, very boring, or where you feel you have no control over what happens in your work environment, or a work environment in which you feel not understood or not appreciated. That is now chronic stress that leads on to mental illness. And as you have hinted, again, not just mental illness, but also physical illness. One of the ways experts are able to monitor a healthy from an unhealthy organization is actually very interesting. It's in the number of people who turn in sick at any particular time. So if a company is spending a lot of money on what are called psychosomatic conditions, meaning a lot of people are suffering from Hapa syndrome, that is an indication that organization is stressing her employees. A very old study, I think from Israel, was able to indicate this extremely well by looking at the attendance to a student health facility at the beginning of term and 2 weeks before the examination. And in this study, it was possible to show that at the beginning of term, when everybody has just come from home and they're happy and the lessons are not hard, the attendance to the health center is low. When they are coming close to very difficult and stressful exams, the attendance, as you say, for backache, for headache, for lack of sleep, for tiredness, for what are called psychosomatic symptoms goes up. So in an organization where the HR department finds that expenditure on health benefit on the outpatient basis, for example, is being consumed towards the end of the financial year, for example, it is only right that a good HR practitioner should ask themselves the question, is this a reflection that we have chronic stress in our work environment that is translating to forms of mental illnesses, including depression? So the answer to the question that has not been asked is, what is the relationship between stress and mental illness? The simple answer is that chronic stress leads on to diagnosable and hopefully treatable mental health disorders. You may concede. Great. Proceed, please.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. So just to add on to what Dr. has just said is that often when we find distress in the workplace or even stress-related work-related stress, so to speak. And this research was carried out by the American Institute of Stress, and they found that often about 80% of workers do feel that they experience high levels of stress at the workplace, and often they feel that they may need help in terms of managing this stress. And even 42% felt that their colleagues need help. So I think this one just relates it and brings it in to understand why this conversation is also important, especially with HRs, because then we can actually translate and maybe see how are our organizations coping. Are our staff able to identify and deal with stress at the workplace, or do they feel like they have the necessary resources needed to cope with this stress? More so highlighting that stress is very much part and parcel of life or even of day-to-day work. Also, further to this, indicating that stress levels in the workplace are rising. This was now carried out as a research during the COVID pandemic, where they found that 6 out of every 10 workers in the major global economies did experience an increase in workplace stress. And in as much as this research was carried out at the peak of COVID, we do need to now bring in and find what is the status now, in as much as we are not past COVID, but as a country, we are also within a very high stress environment, which is related to the political season. That put in touch with the fact that the COVID pandemic, we're still finding the increase in these cases coming in. So this is definitely something that we can also review and use as an indicator or as a benchmark of the higher stress levels within our staff and organization. Next slide, please. So what are some of the indicators of distress in the workplace? What are some of the things that we need to be on the lookout for to indicate that either our colleagues or even ourselves, we're not coping very well as things are? So what do we see when a staff or a colleague is experiencing distress? Often we find that they may withdraw for the team, maybe even isolating themselves, getting to a space of being indifferent about their work, saying that, whatever happens, happens. It doesn't matter. I just can't deal with this, maybe words like that. Finding that this member of staff is now putting off deadlines, sometimes even missing it, postponing and procrastinating activities that they will otherwise be very prompt to, coming into work late, sometimes even making accidents in their job, things that they otherwise wouldn't do. In accounts, sometimes maybe adding zeros or misplacing the decimal point in the space. Experiencing that this person is maybe now starting to lack confidence or acting like they're unsure of their abilities. Someone who was very steadfast, someone who was very confident is now not as confident and not as sure. So it may even affect you as their supervisor in terms of their skills, because now if they're not confident in themselves, then you may also probably find yourself either reassuring them more often or even starting to doubt their abilities to come through and deliver their responsibilities. Also noticing that this person may now start becoming, experiencing low levels of motivation or even feeling detached from the organization or even from their work, sometimes having inappropriate reactions, and this may lead to strained responsibilities. How often this comes into place, especially within the workspaces, finding that someone, maybe you've just made a very simple correction to them and then they burst out crying inappropriately. It's not something that you'd otherwise expect them to cry as a result of, but they do cry. Or maybe even acting out in anger and being very rude and aggressive towards you, yet it's not something that demands such a reaction. And this may also result into now the person experiencing strained relationships. And then we also are on the lookout for changes in appearance that this person may have in one space or the other. So this one is more with regard to their dress code, how they present themselves, maybe not taking a shower, not coming into work dressed appropriately, and so and the like. Yes, I don't know, Dr. if you have something to add?
Now, I think keep going because time is completely against us and we have 33 questions to answer. So, yeah. And
All right.
you've got, I think, another 3 or 4 slides. Go on then.
All right. All right. So what are some of the impacts that we now come to see as a result of mental illness? And as we continue, we're going to look at the impact of mental illness on the employee, on the employer, and also on the caregivers, because these people live in families or come from a support system, maybe friends and family, and how those affect them as well. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry. We can go to the previous one so that I can break those down. So when it comes to the impact of mental illness on the employee and the employer, because there is where we actually do experience. On the employee themselves, since this person is maybe experiencing distress, it may actually result in long-term, maybe even career stagnation. They're not able to come to work on time, often because of if the stressors are related to the workspace they're in. You may often find that people are not staying long enough in an organization even for them to gain the necessary experience. So you find that they may probably job hop or move from departments, from space to space. And they may often now start referring to the environment as not being very healthy for themselves. To the employer, of course, then we have challenges with performance. We do have challenges with being able to maybe plan these individuals' future in terms of bringing in money, and the company growth also gets affected. And then we also have job dissatisfaction. So also the employer may experience very many people leaving the organization, especially if the workspace itself is the one that is not if the staff is not feeling supported at the workplace. When it comes to the impact that mental illness may have to the caregiver, often we do find that in the long term, if mental illness is not well managed, we do have families breaking up, a lot of separation and divorce in families, children getting destabilized because of the loss in terms of jobs and also performance at work coming in. Then you may also find that the situation, environment, the financial and situation in the family level is also becoming destabilized, and the increase in people working below and living below the poverty line also becomes a risk factor. Often we also find that if a person does have a mental illness, so say for example, I as Grace do have a mental illness that is not well managed, more often than not, we do find that my caregivers, maybe my parents or my spouse or my children, who are my primary caregivers within that space, are at risk of also developing a mental illness themselves if they do not get the proper support therein. So we do find that one person having poor mental health may affect a lot of other people around them. Next slide, please.
All right. Now, wait. Now,
okay,
we must allow you to take a breath. A deep breath, and we'll ask Victoria to take us on stress management, please. Victoria, are you able to take us through management?
Yes, I can.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Right, so there are ways of adaptive coping when it comes to stress management, and there's also what we call maladaptive, which means ways which do not work when it comes to managing stress. We vouch for the 4 A's of stress management, which are avoid, accept, adapt, or alter. When it comes to avoiding, for example, maybe you could be someone who gets stressed up because of being stuck in traffic, and you want to go somewhere to Kitengela, for instance, but now you want to use Mombasa Road and the traffic there is horrendous. So what do? You use the expressway, therefore you avoid the traffic that is on the Mombasa Road. So that is one way of avoiding stress. Accepting, we've had to live with COVID. We've had to wear masks. We've had to keep distance. We've had to sanitize and all that. So we've accepted what COVID has brought to us. So we manage that stress by acceptance. Adapting means that you change yourself to suit the situation. If you're in a work environment and you have this boss who you've just had to deal with, you just adapt to his way of working. That way you'll be able to manage the stress. Altering means that you change the situation. For example, you could be having this colleague who comes to your desk all the time and just gives you negative energy, maybe by bad mouthing other people within the company. So what do? You express to them and tell them that you have boundaries and you do not want to discuss other employees within the organization. That way, the next time he comes up to your desk and wants to talk about another employee, he remembers what you said, and thereby you alter that situation. Let's go to the next slide, please. So when it comes to stress, how do you keep yourself sane in a world that is constantly throwing a lot of stressors your way? Because remember, in the work environment, the home environment, we have very many sources of stress. And therefore, what do we ask people to do is something that is called self-care. Just like that definition of self-care, it means that no one else is going to initiate it apart from yourself. So what is the definition of self-care? It is that ability of an individual, family, and community to promote health, to prevent disease, to maintain health, and cope with illness and disability with or without the support of a health worker. We have different types of self-care, and one could be physical self-care. This is where you do things like exercising, or maybe you go to, you take a walk, or you take a break from your desk and take a walk around the office. That is physical self-care because it helps your body keep healthy and active. Then we also have emotional self-care. Emotional self-care is a type of self-care where, for example, you do journaling just to help your mental status. And also, if you're going to see a therapist to discuss things that could be happening in your life, that is part of emotional self-care. Practical self-care is about organizing yourself. For example, if you are the kind of person who lives from paycheck to paycheck because you do not have a way of doing your budget, maybe when you do your budgeting or look for financial management courses, someone to help you be able to budget, then that is practical self-care because you're helping manage your own lifestyle. Maybe for the ladies, for those of us who have very many, for the ladies, for those of us who have, someone kindly mute. Kindly mute. Back to practical self-care. I was saying for those of us ladies who have quite a number of clothes in the closet, and maybe you wake up late every morning and you have a hard time wondering what to wear with what. When you organize your closet and put what matches with everything, you know, the shoes, the coats, and the dresses, then that is practical self-care when you organize your closet. Then we have social self-care. Social self-care is about touching base with people who are significant in your life. This could be having lunch with maybe your significant other. It could be making phone calls to your parents. It could be making phone calls to people who are close to you. So that way you stay in touch with them socially. Spiritual self-care is not just about religion. Spiritual self-care means getting in touch with yourself. Of course, people do realize spiritual self-care, some of us through religion, meaning that you go to church or you go to the mosque. Others, it could be through meditation, it could be through yoga, and that is what spiritual self-care is all about. Let's go to the next slide. So when it comes to the referral system, someone could be asking, so if I do discover that I do have a mental health issue, or a colleague or a family member has a mental health issue, what is the referral system towards getting help from a mental health expert? So we talked about the 4 Ds of abnormal psychology, whereby you notice that someone has changed. They were behaving in one way before, but maybe you've noticed that they have some behavior change. So who notices this? It could be colleagues at the workplace, it could be family members. Now, based on the scope of your company, you could be having what we call an employee assistance program, which will point this person to a therapist or to the help that they need, because it's not just about pointing people to therapists. It could be pointing people to other resources like maybe lawyers or doctors or whatever other professionals. So if this person is within the work environment and one of the workmates notices that something is happening, or maybe it's a family member, then they can be taken to a counselor or a psychologist. And what happens when they get to the counselor or the psychologist is that they get to have an assessment done. Now, the assessment is based on the symptoms. And remember here, we are talking about a patient who is able to communicate, because we do have some patients who could be having what we call psychosis. They're out of touch with reality, and therefore they're not able to talk for themselves. So sometimes you do have what we call involuntary admission, where the next of kin brings them to the facility for them to have this kind of an assessment. Once a psychologist has assessed this person, this client, then they're taken to the psychiatrist for a further assessment. And if need be, and I do say if need be, then they are prescribed for medication. There's this wrong notion that every time you go to a mental health facility, they always give you drugs as a first line of treatment, which is not true. But we do the assessment, and the medication only comes in when it is necessary. If the patient is in a point is not doing very well to a point of needing admission, then of course we do admit them for further management and care. And then once they are discharged, we do what we call post-discharge follow-up, meaning that after every 2 weeks for a period of time, we do call them and have a therapy session with them. And then they also check in with the psychiatrist just to see how they are doing or managing. Next slide, kindly.
We're done.
We're done. Thank you. Back to Dr. Rajab or Dr. Jenga.
Thank you.
All right. It's now 1:09 p.m. I'm going to ask Irene or Sumoy or Mr. Boyd to make some comments, if they will. And then, time permitting, we will attempt to answer the remaining 34 questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. I think it has been a well organized program. The slides are very good. Basically, it is giving us the basic on mental health. And I think for this case, we will request that we, if possible, we go through the questions around here. But before that, apologies to those people who are trying to do the chats on the normal chat program. We have had a technical issue on that one, but we have the question and answer is open to everyone. So apologies for those who are trying to do the chats in the other end. Thirdly is maybe after, okay, let's go through these questions and then we see what we can say afterwards. Thank you, Dr.
Any other comment from
maybe somewhere?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. and the team from Chiromo Hospital Group. Mine is just to echo what the chair just said, and I have a lot of take homes, but most importantly is the demystification of mental health. All along, I have just known mental health was just psychological. But today, I got to learn it is more than that. It is the emotional aspect of it. It is the social aspect of it. So thank you very much, team. And also the learning of self-care. It's something that we can actually protect ourselves from reaching the mental health issue. Thank you.
Okay, Gadoni, there's a question for you. Make a quick comment on life-work balance. Gadoni? Yeah. Gadoni seems to have gone home for whatever reason. Dr. Rajab, do you want to help Gadoni?
Sure, Doc. So work-life balance in essence means, imagine the seesaw, work on one hand and life, your social life, your home life, your school life, if you have one, on the other. How do you ensure this seesaw is balancing? The weights are not on either side too much, because anytime the weights are not equal, one side will suffer. If the situation at work demands so much of you to a point that you do not give yourself to your home, to your friends as needed, then the home suffers. So you need to strike a balance in a way that you ensure you are at work when you need to be there, be present and productive for the time you're supposed to be there, so that when you leave and you go to do other things, which is now your life, you haven't carried work to your life. And also ensure that your relationships and your activities at home with your friends are cordial, so that you don't bring anything from home back to work that will affect how you relate with your colleagues, how you're productive at work, and make that side suffer as well. Thank you.
There's a fascinating question here, Dr. Rajab, again for you.
Yes.
And it's asking, how can you make the workplace more friendly?
Sorry, how can we make
the workplace more friendly?
The workplace can be made friendly, in my opinion, first of all, by starting with you as the individual. How is your attitude towards your work? Is it a place you go because you have to, or is it a place you go because you look forward to? Do you enjoy your work or not? As you're looking for a job, those are the questions you need to ask yourself initially. Otherwise, you will end up at a place where no matter what happens in the environment, nothing will be fulfilling. So first starts by you choosing the right career path and the right place to place yourself. Secondly, have good relationships with your colleagues at work, because you don't work in a vacuum or in an island. Ensure that your interpersonal relationships are good so that everyone you're with at work is enjoyable to work with. Communicate. In case there's something that you think isn't going right, don't bottle it down, but find the right channels to communicate your concerns so that they can be addressed. And hopefully you find that the work environment is polite.
An interesting question from Valerie Ogutu, which I'll try and answer, is how, by the way, you can stop sharing, Dr. Rajab.
Okay.
Is how do you determine when you have done your best as an employer to help an employee cope with a mental disorder, but they are not improving? That is a question that is asked by HR departments all the time. And it's not an easy question, because it begs the question of what is your best. And part of the reason it begs the question of what your best is to do with the employee-employer relationship, which is governed by HR manuals, among other things. One of the things that I think we as Kenyans have done not successfully, have done well and continue to work on, is this whole question of mental health issues not being covered by the insurance covers that we take from all these insurance companies. Not covering mental health by insurance is a legal matter. The law is very clear on the matter. If you give cover for health and you limit or exclude mental health, that is against the law, the Mental Health Act. So part of the problem, Valerie, is that you may be limited in what you can do because the insurance company that you're using doesn't allow for the proper evaluation and management of your patients, either by way of access to psychologists or psychiatrists or to hospitals, and sometimes even to medication. So that's one part of the problem. The other part of the problem, which is perhaps even bigger, is you as an HR practitioner, you want to be helpful, but you don't want to be intrusive. And in mental health, the balance between being helpful and being intrusive is very thin indeed. And in a sense, that is where your skill now as an HR practitioner comes in, because you can't help unless you have the information that you require. And if you push too much, then you'll be accused of being intrusive. So the answer is every situation is different, and you must exercise your best judgment. You are an HR practitioner because you have been trained and you have skills. And lastly, and I think most crucially, as they used to say about dawa ya aspro, maumivu yakizidi muulize daktari. Ask a colleague. I know the power of seeking help from one of your peers. Chances are they will have dealt with an equally difficult situation. Consult, consult, consult. The next question is this: kindly touch on how best HR professionals can find a balance between meeting the mental wellness needs of an employee and meeting their own mental wellness needs without being overwhelmed. Victoria?
Thanks,
We
Dr.
can't hear you.
I think I would go back to, sorry. Thank you, Dr. I hope you can hear me now.
Yeah.
I think I would go back to self-care practices, right? Because if I want to take care of my own mental well-being, then I must also practice self-care. And what have we said about self-care? There's practical self-care, there's emotional, there's all spiritual. So I would say that even you as a HR practitioner, also be at a point where you can actually practice your own self-care to help with your mental well-being. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you. Dr. Rajab, there's a question about lupus. I don't know why Agnes Okore wants to know about lupus. Very in 2 words, what is lupus and how does one get lupus, and is it curable?
Systemic lupus erythematosus is an autoimmune disease. It is manageable, not curable.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's an autoimmune condition, and it affects kidneys, the brain, and other parts of the body. In this day and age, actually, one of the best ways to get answers to this kind of question is to ask, to go to a reliable website like WebMD, and the details of what lupus is and how you treat it will be given out to you from, say, WebMD. Georgina Kilonzo is asking, should we refer our staff to a counselor? And this is to you, Grace, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, when we realize that their issue is beyond our capacity, presumably as HR officers. Grace? Grace Gachanja, either you're muted or you've gone for lunch.
No, I'm right here. Please come again on that question, please. I've not had it.
Georgina is asking, should we refer our staff to a counselor, a psychologist, or a psychiatrist when we as HR practitioners realize that their issue is beyond our capacity?
Okay, thank you for that. So Georgina, in that case, I would recommend that you do refer to either maybe a counselor or a psychologist, and then following the review by the counselor or psychologist, then they can be referred to a psychiatrist. Often we do find that, say for example, in our practice at Chiromo Hospital Group, we work very closely with the psychiatrist, and sometimes may even send a patient to the psychiatrist, and then the psychiatrist refers them for us to review first before then they do it. So yes, you should. It is important, because then even by referring to maybe the psychologist or the counselor or even the psychiatrist, then you can get a report, so to speak, on how exactly you can support this client, this member of staff, or maybe if just to know whether or not they have a problem and how best you can support them within that space. Thank you.
Grace, the next question is from Juliana, and you must answer it also. What is the difference between a psychologist, psychiatrist, and a counselor? Very quickly, time is not with us.
All right. A psychiatrist is a doctor who has specialized in, so a doctor as in MBCHB degree, Yule Daktari Kawaida, and then has specialized in psychiatry, the practice. In the practice of like at Chiromo Hospital Group, what our psychiatrists mainly do is that we work closely with them and they do prescribe medication. But when now we talk about psychologist or counseling psychologist or clinical psychologist, what we do is offer talk therapy. So we help this client cope with the mental health challenges that they may have, mainly by offering talk therapy, by helping them learn better coping skills to deal with the challenges that they have at hand, and even probably giving psychoeducation, helping them understand what exactly they're suffering from and how exactly it did come to be. I hope.
All right.
Yes.
All right, Victoria, a question for you. And this is on the need to feel like you are in control in every social situation. For example, there are people who cannot let others speak, and they threaten people if they are not given their way. This anonymous attendee is asking, is this evidence of insecurity on the part of people who don't let others say something?
Thank you, Daktari. Up until the point where you talked about being threatened, I could have said maybe it's just a personality, it's just someone's temperament, because you'll find people who have sanguine and choleric temperaments tend to be very dominating when it comes to conversations. But when it comes to someone now threatening to do something, if he's not allowed to speak, then it sounds like there could be something bigger than just now a temperament issue. What it is that when it is just one symptom, we're not able to really make a conclusive diagnosis. So we'll just be working on an assumption that maybe there could be something about that person in terms of their personality, which could be leading them to behave the way they're behaving. Thank you, Dr.
Okay, and another one for you, Victoria. This is about being unable to take bad news with much emotion. I don't know how to handle those who are going through difficult times, like say bereavement. Does it mean I don't care or don't have feelings for other people?
Dr. I'll ask you to kindly take that one.
Okay, no. I think the question is about a person who feels disconnected from the feelings of others. This can happen in many different instances. One of the instances is when one is so exceedingly anxious that you're getting into states of depersonalization or derealization, where feelings become completely numb. It also happens sometimes in people who have something like, say, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. People with PTSD, for example, say, I know in my head that I love my wife. I know in my head that I love my children, but I have no feelings of love towards these people. It's a state of numbness. I think that's what this person is asking. It also can happen sometimes in very severely depressed people, where your feelings become numb. So, well, Mr. or Miss Anonymous, the answer to your question is go and ask for help from the expert that Grace Gashanja has told you. Jane says, I appreciate this very useful sharing and discussion. Please share the slides. Slides not a problem. Victoria, you can confirm you'll send the slides to everybody who is on this call. I think that's the easiest thing to. Oh, yeah, the calls are coming. Yeah. Is the need to always? Oh, no, that's been answered. Oh, the questions are: how do I handle staff with narcissistic behavior? Grace?
Okay, that's a bit of an interesting one, and I must say a bit tricky. So how do you handle staff with narcissistic behavior? Maybe probably a little bit more context could be important, could be appropriate, or maybe I ask for Victoria to assist with that one. I think it's a bit difficult to respond to that one myself.
All right, Victoria.
Doc, what I would say about narcissism is that for someone who has narcissistic tendencies to be corrected on anything is very difficult, because they already do not perceive that they have a problem. So it becomes a problem to help them.
Are we together?
Yes, we are.
Victoria?
Yes.
Dr. Rajab, do you have any comment on narcissism?
Sorry?
Do you have any comment on narcissism as a concept in general?
I think it's a personality disorder, as rightly pointed out, and a lot of people will not accept they have a problem, even if those around will notice. But if for some reason the narcissistic traits get to a point that then push the individual to therapy, most of the time they can be helped to, given a mirror of themselves, and through good sessions, they can try to adjust some of their narcissistic traits. But ultimately, to be honest, his personality is part of you, very difficult to alter.
And one last question now, because it's now 1:28. in the afternoon. Susan Namachi says that she resonates well with the question asked of Victoria about people feeling out of control and insecure. And Susan says, I resonate with the above question. I have employees who actually seem mentally disturbed and keep putting up faces and are not willing to share. I suppose she means their feelings. I am not sure how to approach them to advise. What would be the best approach without causing alarm and driving them away from seeking assistance? Dr. Rajab?
Thank you, Doc. Thank you, Susan, for the question. The easiest way is don't be afraid to approach them, because by assuming they will not listen or even accept to hear you out, you've already allowed the problem to continue. A lot of problems we assume persist because we just don't allow the conversation to begin. Allow the conversation to begin, and only then you will know which waters you are swimming in.
Thank you very, very much. Panelists, I don't know if I'm allowed to congratulate and thank you, but I'll do it anyway. Well done, panelists. I will now put the whole session back to Mwenyekiti Bwana Boyd, because
maybe before you, I would just like to inform the team here from IHRM that with good authority, the booklet that will be eventually launched after the elections does provide for digitalized screening tools that can be used by individuals. So the HR at IHRM will have them, and they can use them to help their workforce, and even each individual at the workspace can actually screen themselves, but they are just screening tools. Eventually, they can now go for proper assessment if need be. Thank you.
Did you tell us where you are, Dr. Rajab? Because I think this is your opportunity to tell us where you are.
Currently, in Mombasa. Since we are actually doing the Nyali, the coast and eastern region IHRM, this talk has been about that group. It's good that you know. Right now, we don't have to refer all our patients to Nairobi. We are now located in Mombasa. We have a branch at Nyali along Mount Kenya Road. For those who need help or who know people who may need some psychiatric assessment and help, then there is a facility near you now. We are in the neighborhood. Thank you.
Mwenyekiti Bwana Boyd, back to you.
Asante sana, Daktari. I really appreciate the talk that we have had. I really appreciate everything that we have. And indeed, it has been a good discussion. I want to believe all the HR professional from Coast Eastern branch have learned something. And it is important also to note that Coast Eastern branch covers, it is wide. We have 6 counties in Coast, and we have 8 counties in eastern part of the country. So it is bigger. It is good to, we are trying as much as possible to see to it that we reach the far end of Marsabit. So that is how we decided that at least we have this online program. And therefore, let me just welcome somewhere, maybe take it from there somewhere.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, the Chiromo team, for the very informative discussion. This was a very, very wonderful webinar that has been wanting. So thank you, and I wish to, if there are no questions from the participants, I would like to call upon Florence Fundi to give us a vote of thanks and also prayers as we close the webinar. Florence, are you there?
I just realized Florence has a challenge. She has a challenge.
connectivity issues.
Yes.
Laban? Is Laban here?
Okay. I don't know if he's around.
No, he's not around. Chair, guide me.
Okay, thank you. I think we can, for the purpose of time, it is already
3 minutes past.
3 minutes past. Just to appreciate everyone in this group. Thank you for your support, team. Thank you for everything. Please, let's join together. For those in Mombasa, for those in Kwale, for those in Kilifi, tufike Pride in town. Let's celebrate. Let's have this celebration of HR month in style. Let's end it in style. For those people in eastern part, we are having it in Kitui. Let's go to Kitui, St. Paul. I think a college called St. Paul, second in Kitui. Thereafter, we'll have an evening dinner, a round table dinner in Kitui for those who will be in Kitui. So basically, let's join together. Let's celebrate the HR month together. Thank you, HR professional. And I know also among STHs, we have those who are not HR professional, but they are professionals from any other field. We welcome you. Just seeing a few of my friends, and we really appreciate. Thank you very much. And Chiromo team, you cannot end this without saying thank you for this webinar. You have done us good. And it is the beginning. It is the start of the beginning, meaning that it is we expect more series of this program as we continue together. Let's partner. Let's continue partner. Thank you, Daktari. You have done us good. Dr. Njenga leading the team. Rajab from Mombasa. Thank you. There are those people who work behind the scene. Beryl, you have done us good. Thank you very much. I know you are one of the organizers on this. Sister Sylvia, Madam Sylvia Mugo, Operation Manager. I think we will keep on interacting here and there as we continue planning together. Thank you very much. God bless you. So, Samuel, you can now close the meeting. Enjoy your lunch, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Good. Oh, that was nice.
Very nice indeed. We went far and wide. We had 300 plus participants. So yes, it was worth it.
Someone is asking, John Minor, when is Pride in? It is on Thursday. Thursday.
And the slides, can we share? We would share the slides in the WhatsApp platforms. Is that agreeable, Chair?
Yeah, we can share. We can share.